so this is a model that I have used for probably 20 years or so in my office, and I use this model to explain what underlies the rules of good communication. In the 80s, we decorated my husband's office, and he wanted an English hunting theme. And so we had, I had these like little wooden ducks on the shelf, and I got really frustrated with a couple one day, and I'll get to that example in a second. And so I pulled the ducks off the shelf to explain what I could see was going on. And so it's become a very helpful model. I'm constantly going back to it in my head. Because what this does is explain a process that we as all human beings go through any time that we interact with the world at all. Okay, so not just from talking to somebody. Now, so the first doll, of course I use ducks in my office, but an intern of mine couldn't find ducks, so they got the little Russian, the nesting dolls, right? Okay, so the first little doll, Matryoshka doll, stands for reality. I want you to write God, or video camera perspective, all right? This is reality with a capital R. We're going to just pretend there's only one reality in the universe. I personally think that there is. Some people will debate that with you, but we're going to say this is reality with a capital R. In my office, I'm across the street from the emergency room entrance to a hospital, and there's a street outside. And so usually when I'm teaching this in my office, I say, okay, I want you to look out this window, because it's a big picture window, and everything within this window frame on the other side of the glass is reality with a capital R. Okay? But as we look at that reality, all right, you're going to notice a couple things. You're going to notice the red curb across the street first before you notice anything else. Why? Because red is a color that's connected to survival, and our brain is hardwired at a cellular level to notice red before any other color, because it's the color of fire or blood. Then I'm going to say you'll also notice the moving cars before the parked cars. There's always a lot of parked cars. Why? Because at the level of survival, for survival, we need to notice moving objects before stationary objects. So that's hardwired into our brain. I used to have, up until about 4 weeks ago, a big olive tree right in front of my window. It was great. It gave me lots of privacy. Unfortunately, they cut it down. But when I had the olive tree, I'd say, now this olive tree is here every day, but I really notice it when they trim it twice a year. Because we always notice the unfamiliar before the familiar first. And again, that has survival value. Okay. And it's hardwired into our brain at a cellular level. All of those things that I mentioned are examples of perception. Okay? And perception is a filter. I want you to write filter. Perception is a filter that we can never get away from. It's always there. It's hardwired into our brain. And there's three very important things about perceptual filters. They're immediate. Let's spell today. They're automatic. And they're unconscious. Okay? They're immediate, they're automatic, they're unconscious. When people look outside my window, they don't have to go, oh, I better look at the red curb first because red is important. Our eyes just go there. We just go to the moving object. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So our filters are immediate, automatic, and conscious. Well, guess what? We don't just have visual perceptual filters. We have psychological perceptual filters. Those things can have to do with the kind of day we're having, whether we're PMSing, whether we're low blood sugar. They can have to do with if we're in a conversation or relationship with someone who that person reminds us of from our past, or the past that we've had with that person. Okay? There's all sorts of things that can go into that filter. All right? So this doll represents our perception of reality. The next doll represents our interpretation of our perception of reality. Okay? So when people are looking out the window at my office, I'll say, you'll see a lot of shiny, boxy objects with round things on the side. What are they?
Cars.
Cars, but they all look different. But we know the meaning on that visual object is that's a car. If I was from deepest, darkest Africa and I'd never seen a car before, I would just see a shiny, boxy object with round things on the side. So we have to interpret what we see or hear, okay? So this is the meaning that we put on something. Another way of thinking about this particular part of the process, it's our thoughts, it's our theories, it's our conclusions. Very often it's our theory of the motivation of the person who's talking. Okay, it's our conclusions or assumptions. It's our thinking. It's our meaning that we put on it. Okay? So this one represents our interpretation of our perception of reality. Then we get to the feeling doll. This is how we feel about our interpretation of our perception of reality.
And it's removing ourselves from reality.
So what do you notice about the dolls on your paper?
They're getting bigger.
They get bigger. That's the point, right? Most of us have conflict about these two dolls. I'm used to saying dolls. Not about this little one over here. And I'll give you some examples. So the couple that walked into my office some 15, 20 years ago now, I've been working with them for about a year. When they first came to see me, they were pretty close to divorce. We've been working together for a year. They made a lot of progress. They're pretty much in a good place. And then one day they come in and the husband says to me, "That's it, we're getting a divorce." I'm like, "You're what?" I said, "Why are you getting a divorce?" He said, "Because she left the pool light on." I'm not kidding. Okay? She left the pool light on. And I'm like, my word. So we have this big, long conversation about, like, and what came out, basically, was that the context, his filter was, he was unemployed, he was stressed about bills, and he was sitting down paying the bills and looking at the electricity bill. And he'd asked his wife over and over and over again, "Please remember to turn off the pool light when you have a swim at night." She liked to swim at night. Well, she would forget to turn it off. It would stay on all night. They wouldn't see it during the day if it was on constantly. Okay? So the context is he's doing the bills. He's upset about the bills. She leaves the pool light on again. And his interpretation is she doesn't care about how I feel. She doesn't care about how stressed I am. She's not paying attention to what's important to me. Therefore, I don't want to live with somebody who doesn't care about me and doesn't pay attention to me. All right? So, we did a little bit of brainstorming. We decided to buy a little timer for the light so she could turn it on at 15 minutes and turn itself off. And guess what? They didn't have to get a divorce. That's a miracle. Okay? True story. But that's what happens all the time in our relationships. Yeah. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay? So let's go back just to take the example you brought up of your friend who felt like you were judging her for the smoking. All right. So this reality duck represents, at a behavioral level, and this is very important, what was actually said or done. This is what the person actually said or says or does. She was looking at you, and you were saying or doing something, supposedly. Okay. And then it ran through her filter, and her interpretation was, you're judging her. She had a feeling of rejection, embarrassment, humiliation, anger, whatever. And then she made a decision, right? So we have decision and behavior over here, right? That she couldn't be your friend anymore.
That happens to me all the time.
I think all of us.
Yeah.
It does.
It does. All the time.
Yeah.
Right? So, here's another example of kind of how this process works. And this is a stereotyped example. Probably won't apply to anybody in the room, I'm sure, because it's a made-up example. let's just say, wife's at home cooking dinner, husband comes home, and he frowns, doesn't say hello, and goes upstairs for half an hour, right? She perceives this and thinks to herself, he's angry. She starts thinking, what's he angry at? Is he angry at me and now he's not talking to me, or did he have a bad day at work or whatever? Pretty soon she's feeling angry and hurt. He comes downstairs and she's like, buddy, I don't know what your problem is, but as far as I'm concerned, you can just leave it at the office or don't bother coming home because I'm not going to put up with this, you know what, anymore. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, what happens if he frowned, he didn't say hello, and he went upstairs for half an hour because he was having an attack of diarrhea?
Attack of diarrhea.
Okay? And this is where the next point on your handout comes in. 97% of communication is nonverbal. Right?
But it could be misinterpreted.
But it can be misinterpreted. That's right.
About 97%.
97% of our communication is not what we say, it's how we say it. So last time, for example, I said to Andrea, so how are you today?
And I told you the truth.
Yeah. And, or I could say to Natalie, so how are you today?
Yeah.
I said exactly the same words. Different message. 97% of our communication is nonverbal. But we're always having to interpret that. And nonverbal behavior is what? It's more ambiguous. We don't always know what it means. Now, actually do a pretty good job of interpreting nonverbal signals because, as I'm going to talk about in a second, they're actually hardwired in our brain. But if somebody has a downcast expression, it could be they're angry, or they're depressed, or they're preoccupied, or they're having gastrointestinal distress. We don't know why they have a downcast expression.
They're not well.
Right? And guess what? The bigger and cloudier their filter, what do you think we do in terms of our interpretation of nonverbal behavior? Right? It's going to get turned into way something different. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, so one of the ways, for example, that this nonverbal behavior is so important is, I don't know if you guys have, well, I think I mentioned this last time. We talked about the program Lie to Me.
Oh, yes, I've seen it.
Remember we talked about
all of them.
Those really subtle nonverbal signals, right? I don't know if you who weren't here, if you've ever seen the show Lie to Me. If you have Netflix, go look at the first episode.
Oh, that's great.
Lie to Me is about the science of interpreting microscopic, not microscopic, I'm sorry to say my brain's on very fuzzy. What was the word that I used last time? They're like momentary flashes, right? Micro expressions, that's the word. Micro expressions and micro behavior and aspects of tone of voice and the pauses between, even the length of the pause between words in a sentence, okay? But on Lie to Me, what they do is they'll interview someone and they videotape them. And then they will pick up these micro expressions that are like a split second. You have to slow it down to even see, right? And the program is about this guy who's an expert, and he's an expert at seeing this, right? And so he can tell if somebody's lying, hence the thing Lie to Me. What's really funny about the program is, especially in the first year, right before they go to commercial, if they were like talking about a particular anger, you know, a feeling like anger or disgust or whatever, or deception, then they would flash up all these still pictures of famous people, famous real people
Like
in the media as examples of these micro expressions.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
One of which being a former president I won't mention by name. Yes, it would be Lashara, but it was kind of interesting. So the thing is that we are picking up those nonverbal signals all the time. Our brain is constantly interpreting them. And we talked last time in the context of, I really believe women are better at picking up those really subtle nonverbal signals that we would call, mother's intuition, or, women's intuition, those vibes that we get from people, right? So we're always in a position of having to interpret these nonverbal signals, and there's a lot of them. And here's the thing, which is very important. If it's a significant relationship where we have a lot of history, or we have things in our history that are very emotionally laden, those very subtle things that our brain is picking up at the level of immediate, automatic, and unconscious will trigger things in our brain that will tend to push us towards a certain interpretation and feeling more times than not. And it's happening totally out of our awareness, right? Because it's immediate, automatic, and unconscious. So the power in this model is as we become aware of this in ourselves and know that this is what we all do. I teach this to people so that they can stop here and try and start to label their interpretation of what they're seeing and hearing before it goes any further. Now, sometimes it happens so fast that we have the feeling and we're like, oh my word, right? And we have to kind of take a time out. And we have to sit down and figure out your ducks. You need to get your ducks in a row. That's what I say in my office. You got to get your ducks in a row. Okay, because very often what we'll be aware of is the feeling first. All right? Then we have to back up. Okay, so what was my interpretation of what happened? What was actually said or done? And guess what? We're not always going to get to this filter directly, because it's what? It's immediate, it's automatic, and unconscious. The first part of this is we have to pick it up after this has already happened, and we're having this feeling, reaction. And we have to go back and go, okay, hopefully before we make the decision and have the behavior, right? Mm-hmm. We can go back and think, all right, put some thought in the process. What was my interpretation? What meaning did I put on it? And then what we do after a while, I have my ducks literally in a row, right? And so what I show people is that the filter can really skew things out, okay? It can really, so like if the ducks are, like this, okay? And I have this filter, and it kind of sends it like over here, right? And it's kind of, when we compare our interpretation with what happened over and over again, we can figure out, oh, I have this filter that keeps pushing it 60 degrees in this direction. So there must be something in my filter that's pushing it in that way, right? But guess what? The only way you can do that is what? How do you check out your interpretation?
You have to go back to that moment.
You have to go back to the person or to the situation, especially if we're talking about a conversation and understanding a conversation. Mm-hmm. We're talking about good communication, right? Mm-hmm. You have to check out, is what I heard what the person actually said? Yeah. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Would that be significant in holding your peace or not reacting immediately?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where's my phone? Yeah, so part of this, and we're going to talk about how do you later, like how do you slow down the process so you can take a time out and think about it before you go to decision and behavior. Mm-hmm. But the important part here that I wanted to share with you today was just this process. And a lot of people are not very good. A lot of people in my office are not very good about even being able to distinguish between a feeling and a thought. Mm-hmm. Listen to the words that people use, and you'll notice the people who can't distinguish between a feeling and a thought. It has to do with how well our boundaries are inside of ourselves. The poorer the boundaries within ourselves that we're able to differentiate feelings and thoughts and so forth and so on, the poorer we have impulse control in our behavior, and therefore the poorer our boundaries are. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if our internal boundaries aren't very good, then our external boundaries aren't very good. Question?
So is there like a process of maybe self-protecting type of mechanism where, okay, this feeling comes on, we don't know how, or maybe we don't understand all the process, but we do know we have this feeling, and because the feeling is so negative and it's uncomfortable, then we just shut down and remove ourselves, which is what happened to her friend. We just make that assumption, feel that, and staying away from it.
Exactly. Yeah, this
So it's like a defense mechanism, right?
Right. What the way now this is always going on, but what derails it, yes, is that maybe there's been past experiences of rejection or judgment or whatever, right? And the filter is what kicks in is the interpretation is danger, danger, danger.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about anger. And so then that clicks into a whole different neural circuitry in the brain, and we go into automatic defensive behavior.
Yeah.
Because we're in survival mode.
Exactly.
There's a whole different part of the nervous system that actually gets triggered, okay? And our brain gets hijacked by our amygdala, which is in our limbic system, and we actually can't think straight. When the interpretation is danger, 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 at some conscious or usually an unconscious level. And that's what happens in relationships all the time. Something gets triggered at an unconscious level, right? And then it starts running a different program, sub-programs, different software, right? I've talked to people, well, last time we talked about software and about things that can happen to us in their childhood, and it programs us with this outdated software that's constantly running in the background that we don't realize, right? And that's definitely part of what's happening is if we all have self-protective software.
I have a question. Is this more, does this happen more to like young girls than maybe young guys? It seems to me like it's harder for girls to get along, and it seems to me like it's easier for them to just make assumptions and not like somebody because of anything. Guys, you know, they're a little bit
more objective.
They're more, they're simple. And is this true?
Well, we talked a little bit about that last time, so you might want to go back and listen to the tape.
I read it.
But yeah, we talked about how the female brain is a little different and it's wired for language differently. And so females are more sensitive to those micro expressions. I really think the female brain is a little bit more intuitive and more sensitive. That doesn't mean that guys are insensitive, but taken together as a general group, because we're put into the biological position of having to anticipate the needs of an infant that can't talk, we are far more attuned to all those micro expressions and the this and that and the other thing, and so it's far more wired into our emotions and feelings and all that kind of stuff. So yes, and plus our hormones, it's the way our body is. We tend to be a little more emotional. Society also allows us to be more emotional, whereas guys are taught that they need to push that off more. So I think there's also some social conditioning involved, not just physiological predisposition. But I think because we mature sooner, because we notice nonverbal stuff, because nonverbal is ambiguous, because the young girls that you're really working with have their hormones going on. Remember I said depending on if you're PMSing or not, you're going to have a different automatic, unconscious, and immediate reaction to something because your brain is literally can be overactive in certain areas of your brain when you're PMSing as when you're not. You can actually see that on the scan for those who really have huge PMS symptoms. We can actually see that there's a part of their brain that I call it being allergic to their hormones, that when their hormones at a certain state in their cycle, that PMS time, their brain, the singular gyroids, will be overactive. They're going to be more negative. They're going to be more obsessive. They're going to be more angry. They're going to be more all sorts of things. And that's going to be a filter through which to interpret everything. We're made different.
And also I think that women talk more. And we express ourselves more, like you said, and where I think men use a smaller amount of words, and so they tend to just the facts then kind of thing.
Yeah, well, they're more likely to take their feelings and go take it and go like punch a bag for a while, and they're not necessarily going to turn it into language in a relationship. They might go work it off some other way. And, you know, and, yeah, they process differently.
They process it differently.
Okay, but both men and women all do this process.
Right.
This is a human process. But, yeah, our hormones, especially the young girls you're working with at high school, man, this filter is just like, whoo, really crazy, you know.
And I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true for even among women. There's even a difference, because I've noticed with some women, you're like, yeah, whatever's going on, I've even noticed that. There's differences among women. Some are more you're wondering, what are they sensitive to? What's going on, because it doesn't fit with what's going on. And I've noticed that too.
Well, like your friend, you know, you're doing and saying something over here, you have no idea what you're doing and saying. She's running it through her filter and her interpretation. She's having this reaction and decision over here, and you're like, my word, where did that come from? Right? Which is why it's almost always helpful to go, please help me understand. You can memorize it. Please help me understand what it was I said or did that caused you to feel blah, 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 blah. I really want to know. And what that does is, whether that person knows this model or not, it's going to kind of challenge them to get to the behavioral description of what was actually said or done. Make sense?
I actually did that with somebody.
Yeah?
And they stopped and they said, it wasn't you. It wasn't you.
Oh, wow. So it got them to stop, right?
Yeah, and it was like, all of a sudden it's like, what are we talking about? But she actually said, it wasn't you.
Uh-huh. Great.
And that was like,
yeah.
My question is, I'm not that young anymore. I'm middle-aged. But I've had they were harrowing experiences in life where I was close to someone, I thought. Harrowing. And the individuals both said I made them feel a certain way. They couldn't tell me how they felt, and they couldn't even tell me what I said or did. I'm curious. I've gotten a little older. What I did learn was show love to everyone, excessive love, excessive appreciation of people. Try to. I'm curious, in your experience, have you noticed women who are, in your opinion, more mature? Do they, obviously they still have this diagram, but do you notice they're more in line with reality? Women who, mature.
I would say yes.
Okay.
Because to me, mature and healthy are somewhat synonymous. Okay. The more mature you are, the more healthy you are.
Okay.
So the less mature, the less healthy, the more wounded someone is, the more they don't, very difficult for them to get the difference between a feeling and an interpretation. You know what's really hard for some people is the difference is recognizing that there's a reality outside their interpretation of reality. That's the really big deal. Okay. That they whatever their interpretation is, that is reality. There is no filter, there's no reality outside of their interpretation of reality. This is just it.